I received an email from a woman named Shirley Mitchner of Lansing, Michigan. She wanted me to know her story. You see, for 6 years, Shirley has been investigating the tragic death of her son, Brandon. Now, the coroner ruled Brandon's death an accidental drowning, but the Mitchners have never believed he simply fell into the water. They always thought something else happened to him that night. Living without Brandon has cut the Mitchners to the core. It's been very difficult for them to move forward because he was the joy of their house. He brought laughter to everyone. Stay with me as I look into the life and death of Brandon Mitchner. On a hot summer night in June of 2014, Brandon Mitchner disappeared after a night of fun. There had been a big bash aboard a party bus for a friend's 21st birthday. Before Brandon left the house, he gave his mother one last kiss and never returned. Earlier that evening, the Mitchners were at home preparing to leave for Florida to celebrate their 29th anniversary. By 11 p.m., Brandon hadn't returned, and he hadn't called. He always called, and that concerned them, but they thought perhaps he was staying out a little later than usual. The next morning, Shirley and her husband boarded a flight to Tampa. By then, they still hadn't heard from Brandon, but the Mitchners tried to enjoy their vacation. The resort was gorgeous. However, their romantic mood came to a screeching halt after the phone rang. On the line was their oldest daughter, Bianca, and she had terrible news. Brandon was missing. The Mitchners tore out the next day, headed back to Lansing, where they got even more devastating news. You see, Brandon was no longer missing. He was dead. They pulled his body from the Grand River. How did he end up in the river? He was supposed to be at a party. The Mitchners have been wondering that for 6 years and have gotten no satisfying answers. Even before the Mitchners arrived home and learned what happened to Brandon, they had already braced themselves for the worst. The story was Brandon had somehow gotten separated from his group and had fallen into the water. And they learned something even more disturbing. While Brandon was floating in the dark waters of the Grand River in the middle of the night, his friends attended a house party where they played video games and fell asleep without ever having alerted police.
We were literally walking into our room when I got the phone call that he was missing. And somehow I just knew.
Brandon's father had to handle everything concerning his disappearance. Shirley couldn't take it. I want you to listen as she described to me how she found out her precious son Brandon was gone forever.
June 28th, 2014 was the worst day of my life. I said, "What? What do you mean?" I started screaming, running through the bedroom, back and forth. My heart dropped. I said, no, not my child is missing. I stayed in the bedroom. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to hear that they didn't find him. When we made it back to Lansing, there were cars, and I didn't think nothing of it either. But when my brother met me at the door and said, "Shirley, he's gone. Shirley, he's gone," I just screamed and cried and screamed and cried. I still cannot believe my child is gone. I cannot believe it, and it's been 6 6 years. Help me, Lord.
Brandon Mitchner was born in Lansing, Michigan on May 27, 1992 to Stephen and Shirley Mitchner. Nicknamed Brandino, he was their angel. Even while in his mother's womb, he proved to be a leader and a fighter. He was one of triplets, but was the only baby to survive. As a kid, he loved to ride horses. Smart and analytical, Brandon was an old soul, a young man in an old man's body. Spending time with loved ones and eating his mother's delicious soul food, now that was a must. He was very close to his parents and his brothers and his sisters, especially with his sister Brianna, who everyone called Bree. In elementary school and middle school, Brandon played on the basketball team. In high school, Brandon loved to work out and keep in shape. He was a happy and popular kid who never caused any problems. He was a positive person who was always smiling. But at times, Brandon faced challenges. For example, he didn't make the high school basketball team because he was too short. He wanted to be tall like his brother Steve. And even though Brandon was very handsome, the girls thought of him more as a friend, and that made him somewhat unhappy with his dating life. In 2010, Brandon graduated from Grand Ledge High School, and then he attended LCC, where he got an associate's degree. He later worked at Menards, a home improvement store. But Brandon had other dreams of becoming a young black entrepreneur. So he started a t-shirt business. His mother, Shirley, weighs in.
He had a small company, and it was called MIM, M-I-Y-M. Make it your mission to do the right thing. And that's what Brandon was all about in life. Do the right thing. Girls liked him, but said he was nice as a friend, but not as a boyfriend. He was an awesome dancer. The moves he would make would put a smile on your face. Brandon was a gift of gab. He was a young man in an old man's body. He had an old soul. Everyone brought their problems to him, even his siblings.
Brandon was small, but he was tough. He had several incidences in his life that should have killed his spirit. But that didn't happen. He kept on, and he always survived. Until the night of June 28th. Even if he did fall in, how could his friends know he was in the river but not get help? The last person to see Brandon alive was his friend Jose. Not his real name, but we're calling him Jose. Jose called police the next day at around noon and showed them the location where Brandon fell in. According to Jose, the guys boarded a party bus at around 7 p.m. the night before in downtown Lansing. Then they hit up several bars where they all drank heavily. Brandon got really ill from the alcohol and wanted to go home. At some point, Mitchner left the bar, got on the bus, and then exited the bus on foot. Jose followed. Now, Jose claimed he followed Brandon to make sure he was safe, to make sure he didn't drive his car, which was parked nearby. Now, this is the same guy who knew Brandon was in the water all night, but didn't call police until the next day. He said as Brandon headed for the wood line, he followed. It was very dark, and Jose said Brandon started running. He said he lost sight of Brandon, so he stood near the edge of the sidewalk and later heard a thud and then a splash in the water. Assuming Brandon was sick, Jose ran back to call a friend. He said everything was a blur that night. His friends couldn't find his location, and somehow Jose said he ended up in a taxi and back at the house. Now, these are his statements to police. According to the police report, when Jose woke up the next day, he suddenly remembered Mitchner falling into the river. After Jose finally contacted detectives, they gathered a description of Brandon Mitchner and began to look for him. They told Jose to keep calling his friends and to try to get in touch with the Mitchners. Word spread on Facebook that Brandon was missing. Eventually, someone finally got in touch with Brandon's sister, Bianca. She told police her brother was missing and that he never made it home after the party. While Bianca was talking to police, Jose showed up at the scene and led them both to where he thought Brandon fell into the water. Now, this is where the story starts to change. According to the detective's notes, Jose originally pointed to the area near the sidewalk. Now, he was near the tree line, pointing down the riverbank as a possible location where Mitchner could have fallen in. Detectives continued to look for Brandon, and they called his phone but got no answer. It appeared the cell phone had been turned off. Brandon's relatives also went to the house but found nothing. A search for Brandon Mitchner ensued. His relatives were frantic. Investigators started looking in the heavily wooded area along the water where Jose claimed Brandon fell in. As they looked further, they spotted a black and blue baseball hat and a black Jordan tennis shoe down the river embankment. The black and blue hat matched the one Brandon had on that night. Detectives also noticed the area has been disturbed. There was debris. There were scuff marks. Slide marks were on the hill, and freshly broken branches all the way down to the river's edge. Sadly, just before 1 p.m. that partly sunny afternoon, a body was found floating in the Grand River. Detectives watched somberly as the dive team pulled the body from the water. The victim was identified as 22-year-old Brandon Mitchner. Brandon's death stirred deep emotion in the community. Friends, workmates, and former classmates remembered him fondly, describing him as a humorous, kind guy with a twinkle in his eye. One woman who knew Brandon said she'd bake Christmas cookies in his honor every year. On Saturday, July the 5th, 2014, relatives and friends piled into the Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church to say goodbye. The Mitchners buried their son in his favorite pair of tennis shoes. After the funeral, the Mitchners still had more questions than they did answers. It looked like they were getting close to some answers after detectives got their hands on video surveillance footage that captured Brandon Mitchner and his friend Jose walking on the sidewalk. Moments later, a person who appeared to be Jose ran back and forth a couple of times before finally disappearing from view. Brandon was no longer with him. Detectives received a phone call from a young man identifying himself as Brandon's closest friend for 15 years. Now, we will call that friend Adam. Again, not his real name, but we're using the name Adam. Adam gave detectives a very interesting detail about Brandon and Jose's relationship. Now, according to Adam, Brandon and Jose were business partners, and they had only become friends since they started making t-shirts together. Detectives also learned Brandon didn't always get along with his business partner. In fact, they argued quite a lot over money and t-shirt production. Before Brandon died, he complained to his friend Adam that they could have been making a lot of money, but Jose wasn't working hard on the business. In fact, Brandon wanted Jose out. He wanted to cut ties with him. Next, investigators spoke with another young man who attended the party. He said he remembered getting a series of phone calls about Brandon falling, but he wasn't able to find Jose's location. Eventually, the calls stopped coming in, and he heard nothing more from Jose until he saw him back at the house. The next morning, they all woke up and realized Brandon was nowhere to be found. Despite the information, investigators concluded that Brandon's death was just an accident with non-criminal intent, that he had gotten drunk and fallen into the river, that the bruises found on his body were most likely sustained during the fall, or perhaps they were made during the motion of the boat. Investigators couldn't find any evidence that a fight took place between them, and they believe the witness who came forward stating he heard two guys fighting couldn't have been Jose and Brandon because it didn't fit the timeline. Lansing police closed the case, but later turned the case over to the Michigan State Police. The state police reviewed the case and agreed with the previous findings. The case is officially closed. So where does that leave the Mitchners? Well, it leaves them feeling as if they received no justice. They're hoping somehow there will be a new investigation. They believe at the very least Jose should have been held accountable for knowing Brandon was in the water all night and not reporting it until the next day. Now Shirley is trying to get a duty to act law passed, which will make a person accountable for simply walking away from a person in immediate danger. And that doesn't mean that a person has to risk their own lives. All they have to do is call 911. Over the years, Shirley Mitchner has gotten the attention of Senator Rick Jones and former State Representative Teresa Abed. She's also received the support of State Representative Cynthia Johnson, who asked the mayor to reopen the case. Johnson told the Lansing State Journal that there are still too many unanswered questions about Brandon's death and that far too many black issues are ignored. Brandon Mitchner was the only black male among a group of white and Hispanic friends that night. Shirley Mitchner told me she has fought hard to get a guardrail and a sign warning people about that dangerous drop-off near the incline. The fences were finally erected. For Shirley, the journey to justice isn't over. She has more work to do to keep Brandon's memory alive and to find out what really happened to him.
I so want to know what happened. Come see me. Come tell me the story of that night. I will love you all the days of my life until we meet again.
The guys who were with Brandon that night are all grown up, some of them with families of their own, while Brandon lies forever at Chapel Hill Cemetery without any real closure, his family without any real justice. Shirley is taking over Brandon's business. She's selling COVID masks with his logo on it because that's what Brandon would have wanted.